Hello everyone, and welcome to another video where I will be talking about one of my favorite games of all time, The Lord of the Rings Online. I have had a history with this game on and off since about 2014, which is a long time, but not as long as some players who of course have been around since the game launched in 2007 under Turbine Studios, the same studio that developed Asheron's Call 1 and 2, as well as Dungeons & Dragons Online. I've dabbled in a few other MMOs such as Guild Wars 2 and Dungeons & Dragons Online, but Lord of the Rings Online has always been my first love when it comes to playing these types of sprawling RPG experiences. After over 10 years of playing this game on and off, I've decided to list the things that I believe make this MMO still a top-tier game and why it is one of my favorite games of all time. There have been periods of time that I've taken a break from the game. However, I've always returned year in and year out, whether it's because the developers have updated the game through improvements, released new attractive features, or simply because I've returned due to a feeling of homesickness. I think when you've invested thousands of hours into a specific game that you love, you become attached, and it's always quite easy to return after not playing it for a couple of months. When brainstorming the different reasons why I think this game is so fantastic, I was able to come up with 9 reasons. The lore and story, the world building and exploration, class variety, difficulty mechanics, the journey being the real endgame, the relaxation effect the game has on one's soul, lots of evergreen features that keep the game replayable infinitely, its forgiving free-to-play model, and lastly, the community itself. So let's buckle in as I tackle each of these key points within this phenomenal RPG experience. So firstly, let's get into talking a little bit about the lore and story about Lord of the Rings Online. This game has always done a phenomenal job of staying true to the works of Tolkien, to the point where I feel even more immersed in the game compared to sitting down and watching the Peter Jackson films. Even though there are times where it may take a little bit of inspiration from the films, the core story bits follow much more closely with the books. You are able to encounter a plethora of minor characters on your journey through Middle-earth, all complete with some deeper backstory. Glorfindel, the original elf who guided the hobbits to Rivendell, is given a chance to shine a lot more in this adaptation, and we are able to explore an interesting backstory when we play through the Minas Morgul expansion, where we explore some of his heroic deeds in the Second Age of Middle-earth. We are also introduced to Tom Bombadil, who plays a role in making sure that confidential information about Frodo and the Ring doesn't reach unwanted ears. Elrond's sons, Elladan and Elrohir, play a bigger role in guiding the player behind the scenes during the time that Frodo and company are staying in Rivendell. The plot interweaves with the Fellowship at appropriate times, where it doesn't conflict with the original story. So for example, during the downtimes of the Fellowship, when they're staying at the last homely house in Rivendell, you are able to interact with all the main characters without interrupting plot points. This repeats itself again when we reach the Golden Wood of Lothlorien. We are also able to play a minor role in all the major battles that are fought in the story when we get to areas like Helm's Deep, Minas Tirith, and the Black Gate of Mordor. It all makes the player feel like they are playing their own part alongside the story as just another simple adventurer, aiding the free peoples of Middle-earth. There is no chosen one story arc given to the player at any point in time during the game, which makes the world feel much larger and less video gamey compared to other MMOs like World of Warcraft or Guild Wars 2, where essentially every character is playing a different copy as the most powerful superhuman entity. In this game, you are helping the Rohirrim with war preparations, delivering pies to hobbits in the Shire, and clearing out orc camps in Angmar. It helps to make the world a believable place. While you may be a local hero, you are working as a team, not a single entity, which was always the real core of the MMO experience in the early 2000s. A lot of modern MMOs have evolved differently over the years, and yet Lotro holds on to this more traditional approach, setting itself apart from a lot of its counterparts. There is also a great YouTube video that gives a very detailed explanation of the main quest in Lotro, which I will link below. I am not going to be doing that in this video, but I can give you a brief summary of the things you will be doing as you level up all the way from 1 to 150. When you start off the game, there will be a few introductory zones that you will start off based on your choice of race. For elves and dwarves, you will begin your journey in Western Eriador, dealing with an evil dwarf clan known as the Dourhands. For hobbits and men, you will begin your questing in the town of Archit, not too far from Bree, which has been attacked by brigands called the Blackwolds, who have aligned themselves with the evil men of Angmar. For Bjornings, or the Bear Changelings, you start your questing in the Vales of the Anduin, protecting your family home from goblin incursions. You do some behind-the-scenes work to aid Frodo and the Hobbit's journey to Rivendell, and get sent to the Old Forest, where you come into contact with Tom Bombadil and his wife Goldberry. This also takes you to the Barrow Downs, where you are introduced to your first 6-player dungeons. You can also start your leveling in Swanfleet, a more modern zone introduced a few years ago in Lotro's expansion Before the Shadow, which introduces you to lore behind the crafting of the One Ring. You also journey alongside Boromir on his way to Rivendell. You are eventually sent to the Lone Lands, where you explore Weathertop, the area where Frodo was stabbed by the Nazgul. You encounter Radagast the Brown and deal with some corruption that has taken over the ancient ruins of Gartha Garwin. You are then sent to the North Downs to aid the Rangers of Estelden, kin that are led under the leadership of Aragorn, and in his absence, Halbarad. Afterwards, you are sent to the Trollshaws, where you must track down a missing Nazgul who was not washed away during Frodo's encounter at the Ford of Brunnen. This all leads you eventually to the dark land of Angmar, where a new evil is rising, in the form of Mordorith, a once king of Gondor, now corrupted into a Nazgul-like figure, who has taken his place as the new steward of Angmar. Here is where the vanilla game culminates at level 50, in many epic instances and raids that are still run to this day. The main quest, or epic story, as it is called in this game, ends its first volume and begins a second volume that leads the player to follow the Fellowship's path into the mines of Moria. You end up aiding a clan of dwarves to help retake Moria, which leads you on an immersive journey into the vast open-world dungeon that is Moria. This area is really special, and one of the greatest achievements of Lord of the Rings Online, where you get to experience a vast dungeon that is equivalent to the size of many single-player open-world games, and yet it is essentially just one massive zone with several sub-zones, based between levels 50 to 60. You eventually get drawn into Lothlorien and southern Mirkwood, where you have to face off with dark powers that have risen within the ancient fortress of Dol Guldur. Volume 3 brings you to some of the southern parts of Eriador, where you explore the land of the Dunlendings, making your way through Enedwaith, Dunland, and eventually to Isengard itself. In fact, there is a fun little part where you are betrayed by one of the Dunlending clans and captured and sent to Isengard, where you have to do a whole slew of quests for some orc overseers before you're able to figure out a way to escape. This was a really cool story thread, where for once we are not doing quests for the Free Peoples, but for the enemy. We then eventually get sent to Rohan, where we build relationships with the different Rohirrim factions, working to thwart the plans of Isengard. This of course eventually leads us to the city of Edoras, where we once again become an extra in the background and are able to view iconic Lord of the Rings scenes of Gandalf releasing King Theoden from his curse and aiding in the great battle of Helm's Deep. Thus ends the third volume, and we are sent to aid Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli after they pass through the paths of the dead into western Gondor. Here we are able to help Aragorn retake Pelargir from the dark forces of Umbar and Harad. We are then sent to aid in defending Minas Tirith in the east and must make our way through the recently retaken Osgiliath. Here we are conveniently sent to see if we can meet with the reinforcements of Rohan coming up through the northwest. We then are able to participate in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields to help save Minas Tirith and join the Battle of the Black Gate to help give Frodo that little extra time he needs to finally destroy the One Ring. Now, once the main story of The Lord of the Rings is finished, you would think that that's where the story ends. However, the developers of Lotro have taken the opportunity to expand into several subplot arcs where we get to explore Mordor and face lesser foes who are vying for power after the fall of Sauron. We are also sent to some very iconic areas from The Hobbit, such as the Wood Elf strongholds in northern Mirkwood, the town of Dale, and the Lonely Mountain. I'm not going to continue with intricate story points from here, but essentially you get the point. The game continues to pump out expansion after expansion, exploring lands that we don't really get a lot of information about. For example, the last two expansions are now taking place in the realms of Umbar and Harad. Currently, the Lord of the Rings story from the book has not been fully completed because we still have to witness the events of the Scouring of the Shire and the return of Saruman. But at this point, the devs have said that they have multiple years of stories that they plan to continue to tell in this game, so their story content is unlikely to run low soon. Let's also not forget that this world includes a lot of ruins and lore that harkens back to the time of the Second Age and older. When you are wandering around the countryside of the Shire and Breland, you're not just encountering boring forest landscape, but you are exploring ruins that harken back to the days of the split kingdoms of Arnor, such as Cardolan, Rudar, and Arthedain, each with their own history to be uncovered. While the story is mostly in the Third Age and the beginning of the Fourth, it is able to explore a lot of Middle-earth history through flashbacks. There is even one point where you roleplay as an adventurer during the time of the war between Gondor and Mordor, where you serve King Elendil and fight alongside Isildur and his brothers. This game really has always had a good team that has worked tirelessly to stay loyal to Tolkien's work. And this also crosses over into my next point about why Lord of the Rings Online is a good MMO, and that is its world building and exploration. Not only is story told through narrative and drama, it is also told through its world setting, and what better place can you experience that than Middle-earth itself? Lord of the Rings Online has always boasted some of the best world designers in the gaming industry, making Middle-earth come alive like you could never imagine. As was offhandedly stated before, you can pretty much visit every iconic area and location that is described in the books and more. Lord of the Rings Online has got to be one of the largest game worlds ever created that is completely handcrafted and not procedurally generated. From Mount Doom, to the Tower of Orthanc, to the dark abyss of Moria, to the peaceful fields of the Shire, and the elven strongholds of Lothlorien and Rivendell, it is all here in its splendor and glory. It's not just another generic fantasy land to wander through, but it's based accurately on the works of Tolkien and is something that no movie or TV show is able to fully capture. Lord of the Rings Online also encourages exploration through its deed system, which allows you to gain stat increases through a mechanic called Virtue Experience. A lot of this Virtue Experience is tied to completing exploration deeds, which lead you to hundreds of areas on the map that are off the beaten path. This Virtue Experience helps you to boost necessary stats on your character to help you be more viable in group content and solo survivability. Oftentimes you may also be rewarded with a title as well. There are other deeds that are also tied to slaying numbers of different enemy types and improving your reputations with different factions around Middle-earth. Next, let's talk briefly about the class system in Lord of the Rings Online. The class system is similar in a lot of ways to classic WoW, where you have 3 different skill trees that you can put points into, a lot like talent points. For some classes, not all of the trees are the most viable, but Every class has at least one tree that helps to keep it relevant in the game. There are 4 main roles you can play in Lotro. You've got your holy trinity of tank, damage, and healer, but you also got a 4th role of support where you can choose to apply buffs to your group or debuffs to the enemy, such as stuns and weaknesses to different types of damage. The current existing classes in Lotro are Bjorning, a bear shape-shifting humanoid based off of Bjorn from The Hobbit, who can heal, tank, and provide damage all really well. Then you have the Brawler, a monk-like class who uses his or her fists to do melee combat. The Burglar, which is the rogue class of Lotro, who can also provide powerful debuffs to enemies and raids. The Captain, a jack of all trades who can tank, heal, or support damage dealers in helping them do more damage. The Champion, a melee damage dealer or sometimes an offhand tank who can dual wield or use 2-handed weapons. The Guardian, your typical sword and board tank. Hunter, a ranged damage dealer who wields a bow and arrow. The Lore Master, who can nuke enemies with fire and lightning damage or act as a support with the use of a pet. Minstrel, a class that uses song and music to heal his allies. The Mariner, a pirate-like class which I haven't had a lot of chance to play around with since it's been fairly newly introduced. The Runekeeper, a class that can both do magic damage through fire and lightning or choose to heal instead. And the Warden, a more complicated class that uses a set of small skills to create more powerful skills in its tab targeting toolkit, which can either help tank or do damage based on how you spec it. You can mix and match most of the classes to the different races that you can play within Lord of the Rings Online, which include man, elf, dwarf, hobbit, and several sub-races. There are, of course, a few limitations due to lore reasons. For example, the Bjorning class can only be played by the Bjorning race. But all of this variety creates a lot of opportunities to roleplay the character that you wish to play in Lord of the Rings Online. The developers have also started to unroll avatar updates, which is allowing for greater improved character customization within the game's character creator. Another important feature within Lord of the Rings Online is the ability to choose your own landscape difficulty. The problem with a lot of older MMOs is that over time there becomes a lot of bloat and power creep, which makes the game at low levels become a cakewalk, where everything can be one-shotted and the player character can just blaze through all of the content without any real challenge. Lord of the Rings Online fixes this problem by introducing an NPC which, when spoken to, can set the difficulty of the landscape mobs to be much more challenging. This allows you to use all of your skill rotations at low levels, helping you to become a much more tactical player when leveling. However, the developers understood that not all people want to play that way, so they made sure that this specific feature was optional. So if you want to play the game like classic WoW, where aggroing more than 2 mobs could be certain death, you are free to do so. Or, do you have a group of friends that you want to level together with? Set the difficulty to the highest setting, where every fight can only be completed through group collaboration, or only with a character build specifically built and geared for survivability. This is a feature that, quite frankly, a lot of other MMOs could use to help make lower level content seem a bit more relevant. Moving on to my next point is that Lord of the Rings Online puts a lot more emphasis on the journey and not the end game. Yes, there are always going to be group instances and raids at the level cap for players who want to min-max, but Lord of the Rings Online attracts a lot of players who are not necessarily into that style of gameplay. There have been many players who have been playing for years, since the beginning of launch, who have never seen the level cap. I reached cap twice, during the release of the early Gondor patches at level 100, and the Gundabad expansion at level 140. I have experienced a lot of endgame on the progression servers and do enjoy pug raiding in Lotro, but I've never been particularly someone who spends his time mostly doing that in Lotro. Often I decide to go back and level several different alt characters, choosing to level in different zones that I might have skipped over with my main character. Especially from levels 1 to 50, there are multiple paths you can take to level, which helps to ensure that you don't get burnt out too quickly. There is also deeding, which I mentioned earlier, which are feats that you complete either in dungeons, raids, or landscape that can earn you cosmetic rewards such as mounts and different titles to earn bragging rights. There is also a music system in Lord of the Rings Online, which is often quite underutilized and is something that I in particular haven't gotten into much myself. Essentially, you can download ABC files from online websites and put them into a folder that allows your character to play the song in-game using a variety of different instruments. There are whole community events that revolve around this music system where people have full-blown music festivals within the game. On one server called Landreval, there is an event called Weatherstock where players gather on Weathertop to play and cheer on different bands as they perform different set pieces. As you can see, the role-playing aspect of this game is quite strong compared to a lot of its competitors. There is also in-game housing, where players can earn different furniture and decorations through questing and grouping, which can allow you to show off a swath of achievements to your friends. Another point that I just want to briefly touch on is the game is really, really relaxing. There are a lot of cozy spaces within the game. Yes, there are evil places such as Angmar, Moria, Mirkwood, but there are also peaceful areas such as the Shire, Rivendell, and Lothlorien. In the Shire, you barely do any fighting outside the occasional bandit incursion or wolf attack. You're mainly helping hobbits complete farming chores and deliver pies and mail. Yes, sometimes I get bored of these mundane quests and want to go kill things, but I'm also glad that it's in the game. In many ways, I find the Shire to be a very therapeutic zone where I can just hobble around on my 2 feet and enjoy the amazing green landscapes in the depths of summer. You can also take up crafting and farm some pipeweed in the fields of Hobbiton, if that's what you wish. A main point that the devs have been talking about lately has been introducing features that are evergreen in nature and allow you to play the game in many different ways. Leveling can be done through traditional landscape quests, scaled instance solo or duo missions, and bigger scalable instances known as skirmishes. Each path has its own pros and cons, and yet they help break up the grind and allow for a wider variety of ways to level. Standing Stone Games also occasionally releases zones that are not always tied to the level cap, and instead pad out the leveling experience to provide more choice for zones that you wish to level in and zones that you wish to skip. At this point, most of these zones have been padded in between levels 1 to 50, but there has been discussion within the Standing Stones team of implementing zones at higher mid-levels as well. I think this is a great strategy to keep veterans leveling alts and giving newer players a greater abundance of choice. I like the fact that most of the world feels relevant and that you can experience all that the world has to offer without feeling like you are being dragged off to the newest expansion. Let's also not forget the wide variety of in-game festivals that you can participate in year-round. These festivals offer a lot of repeatable dailies that you can use to gain fancy-looking cosmetics and update your character's appearance. You can also participate in fishing and bird watching, which are a part of Lotro's hobby system. Fishing allows you to use taxidermy to place them on plaques in your house as decorations, or you can use them in some high-end cooking recipes when crafting. Bird watching, or birding as they call it, allows you to sight different birds of various rarities throughout Middle-earth and add them to your collection panel. Let's also not forget about the amazing community that this game has. Lord of the Rings Online attracts a much older demographic of people than a lot of games, which means that you come across a lot of people who are adults with jobs and families that play in their free time as a hobby. I have met so many kind people in my travels and have rarely experienced much toxicity from player to player. Yes, you will get the occasional troll who spouts religion or politics in the world chat, but outside of that, most players are really friendly and welcoming to new players. More often or not, as long as you state your experience with the instance, most players are fairly forgiving when you mess up in a raid or fail to react properly when encountering challenging group content, and are more likely to give you helpful advice and guidance as you figure things out. It seems that more people in this game are interested in keeping this community alive than trying to scare new players away. Like I mentioned earlier, people also host a variety of in-game player-made events, including concerts, plays, house decorating contests, and fashion shows. It can almost turn into a bit of a virtual Renaissance fair in its own quirky way. Last but not least, let's go over the game's monetization. In this area, the game has had some ups and downs. At one point, you could only level to about level 30 until you needed to start paying for content, but in the last couple of years, they increased this to level 95, which allows for you to spend several hundred hours in the game without even having to think about spending any money. Let's also not forget to mention that technically, everything in the game can be bought with in-game currency through a mechanic that I mentioned earlier, known as deeding. This can be done in the form of slaying multiple enemy types, exploring, and completing a certain amount of quests within each leveling zone. Completing these deeds will add Lotro points to your account, allowing you to purchase items including full-blown expansions within the game shop. With the free-to-play level cap being raised to level 95, which is up to the expansion of Helm's Deep, you are able to farm a lot more of these Lotro points, easily getting you further into the game if you so wish. But if you want more convenience and you love the game enough to want to support it, you can always get a VIP subscription for as low as $8 a month if you pay in yearly chunks. This also provides you with an additional 500 Lotro points per month and unlocks more content to get you nearer to the more current expansions. By the time you get to the higher levels, you usually have enough Lotro points to purchase any paid expansion all the way up to before the most current released content. Overall, Lotro is one of my favorite games of all time, and I encourage people to still give it a try here in 2024 and into 2025. Also, if you feel overwhelmed by the current level cap of 150, you can choose to join one of the legendary servers, which are progression servers that raise the level cap over time. The newest legendary servers of Angmar and Mordor are currently only at level 50. They do require a subscription, but they allow you to experience all the endgame content as it was released, with 3 to 5 month gaps between each level cap release. It may be less overwhelming for new players who don't want to slog it all the way to 150 in one go. I plan to make a whole additional video on these legendary servers, which I am actually currently playing on now. Anyhow, thanks for sticking around to the end of this video, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. See you next time.